Spring 1943, across the skies of occupied Europe, German pilots saw a new American fighter that would change air battles forever. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt appeared over the continent like nothing they had ever seen before. Its huge radial engines stuck out in front. Thick fuselages looked more like they were made to carry cargo than to fight in the air. Short, stubby wings seemed too small for the quick turns that fighter battles needed. German pilots, who had fought for many years, first ignored these awkward-looking machines. They were used to flying sleek, fast, agile fighters made by the world's best airplane engineers. But within a few months, that ignoring attitude changed into respect, then fear, and finally a desperate understanding that the Americans had brought something totally new to European skies. A machine made not for looking nice, but for causing destruction. Not for showing off, but for survival. Not for personal glory, but for winning with industry. The story of how German pilots learned to respect the Thunderbolt became one of the most dramatic mental changes in the air war. It ended with 86,000 destroyed targets in just 11 months. This is the story of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. May 6, 1941, Farmingdale, New York. Test pilot Lowry Brabham climbed into the cockpit of an airplane unlike anything the United States Army Air Force had ever ordered. The Republic Aviation Corporation's newest fighter prototype sat on the runway like a tank with wings. It weighed 8 tons at maximum takeoff, more than double most fighters of the time. Alexander Kartelli, a Georgian immigrant and Republic's chief designer, had made something new and never seen before. When reports about air battles in Europe in 1940 reached him, they showed a new reality for fighter planes. Pilots needed to fly above 30,000 feet. They needed strong guns to destroy heavily armored airplanes. They needed planes tough enough to survive new heavy machine guns and cannons on German and British fighters. Kartelli ignored the usual ideas. Instead of making the plane light and agile, he focused on power and strength. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, with 18 cylinders and 2,000 horsepower, became the heart of his design. But putting such a powerful engine on the plane created many challenges. The turbo supercharger system needed long ducts running through the belly of the plane. This gave the P-47 its round, barrel-like shape, a result of engineering needs rather than looking nice. Its weapons were more powerful than anything ever put on an American fighter before. 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing. Each gun had between 267 and 425 rounds depending on its spot. Total ammo was 3,400 rounds. When all 8 guns fired at the same time, they shot more bullets than any American fighter in history except the Northrop P-61 Black Widow night fighter. Brabham let go of the brakes and pushed the throttle forward. The huge radial engine roared at full power. The Thunderbolt sped down the runway, heavy but moving with purpose. At 75 mph, Brabham pulled back on the stick. The prototype lifted off the ground smoothly, even with all its weight. Climbing past 10,000 FT, 15,000, 20,000, the plane worked perfectly. At 30,000 FT, where most fighters struggled to climb, the Thunderbolt's turbo supercharger system worked at its best. The engine kept full power. Brabham pushed the nose down into a dive. The speed went past 400 mph, then 450, almost 500. The controls stayed easy to handle, and the plane stayed strong. After landing 45 minutes later, Brabham's report showed what Kartelli had guessed. They had made something new and revolutionary. Not the fastest or most agile fighter, not the plane with the longest range, but maybe the toughest and most heavily armed fighter in the world. June 1942, Bridgeport, Connecticut. The 56th Fighter Group got their first P-47 Thunderbolts. Pilots moving from lighter fighters were shocked. Captain Robert Johnson, who later became one of America's top aces, remembered his first thought. He said, "I thought they sent a medium bomber by mistake." The cockpit sat 9 feet above the ground when the tailwheel rested on the pavement. Pilots needed a ladder to climb inside. Forward visibility on the ground was so poor that crew chiefs had to guide pilots while taxiing. The plane weighed 14,000 ladrudalim fully loaded, 7 tons of fighter that pressed the tarmac under its weight. But once in the air, pilots found surprising qualities. The cockpit was big, a real luxury for a combat plane. Tall pilots who couldn't sit comfortably in other fighters found the Thunderbolt easy to fit in. One pilot joked, "You could almost walk around inside during long missions." That was an exaggeration, but it showed how much extra room there was. The controls, though heavy, moved well with the plane's weight. The P-47 didn't dance through the sky like a German Bf-109. It ruled the sky with raw power and energy. Colonel Hubert Zemke took command of the 56th Fighter Group in January 1943. Zemke had been a combat observer with the Royal Air Force in 1940 and knew how to fight the Luftwaffe. He realized right away that the Thunderbolt needed different tactics than lighter fighters. German pilots were experts at turning fights at medium and low altitudes. Their planes could outturn almost anything in the sky. But the P-47 had advantages they could not match at high altitude. Zemke created the boom and zoom tactic that became the Thunderbolt's main fighting method. Climb to 30,000 feet or higher. Use the better high-altitude performance to get energy and a good position. Dive on enemy formations at speeds near or above 500 millimeters. Shoot with the powerful 8-gun weapons. Use the dive speed to get away before the enemies could fight back. Then climb again and do it again. This was energy fighting at its purest. The Thunderbolt could not outturn German fighters, but it could outdive them, outclimb them, and take hits that would destroy any other plane. April 13, 1943. The 56th Fighter Group flew its first combat mission from Horsham St. Faith Airfield in England. Major General William Kepner, who led the 8th Air Force fighter units, gave clear orders. The main mission was bomber escort. Protect the heavy bombers attacking German factories. Fight enemy planes only when needed to protect the mission. The Thunderbolts joined up with a formation of Boeing B-17 flying fortresses at 25,000 feet over the English Channel. The bomber line stretched for miles. Hundreds of 4-engine planes heading to targets in occupied Europe. German radar stations saw them coming. Luftwaffe fighter units scrambled from airfields across northern France and Belgium. The first interceptions happened near the Belgian coast. Messerschmitt, Bf-109, and Focke-Wulf, FW-190, fighters climbed to meet the Americans. German pilots had learned tactics over 3 years of war. They knew how to take advantage of weaknesses in bomber formations. They understood what escort fighters could do and what they could not do. What they did not fully understand yet was the Thunderbolt. Over the next 3 months, Luftwaffe fighter units met Thunderbolts more and more often. Each fight showed the same pattern. American pilots refused to turn and fight like normal. They fought from above using speed and diving power, and their planes could take hits that would have destroyed German fighters. June 26, 1943. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, flying P-47D serial number 23906, nicknamed All Hell, faced the reality that would make the Thunderbolt famous. Johnson had escorted bombers deep into Germany. On his way back, low on fuel, a group of German fighters found him alone. What happened next became one of the most famous survival stories of the air war. German fighters attacked him again and again, firing hundreds of rounds into Johnson's plane. His canopy jammed. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the windscreen. Control cables were cut. The fuselage was full of bullet holes. Johnson counted over 200 hits after landing. His wingman had been shot down. He was alone, his plane badly damaged, 200 miles from safety. But the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine kept running. The thick aluminum skin and backup control systems kept the plane flying. Johnson carefully flew the battered Thunderbolt across occupied Europe, unable to bail out because the canopy was stuck, fighting to stay in the air with broken controls. An FW-190 pulled up beside him. The German pilot looked at the shattered Thunderbolt, clearly seeing Johnson through the bullet-filled fuselage. Johnson was in the cockpit, hurt but awake. For a long moment, the two pilots flew side by side. Then the German pilot saluted, a sign of respect for a doomed man, and rolled away without shooting. No German fighter could have survived what he saw. The pilot must have thought Johnson would crash in minutes. Johnson made it back to England. Ground crews counted 210 bullet and cannon shell holes. The fuselage looked like scrap metal ready to be thrown away. But after 3 weeks of repair, all hell returned to combat. Word of Johnson's survival spread through both American and German squadrons. For American pilots, it proved the power and toughness of the Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt's legendary toughness became clear. For German pilots, it brought serious questions. What kind of plane could take so much damage and still keep flying? What did this say about American engineering? What did it mean for pilots who were used to their own fighters being fragile? October 8, 1943. Major Hans Philipp, a Luftwaffe ace with over 200 confirmed kills, led his fighter wing on an interception mission. Philipp was the best of the Luftwaffe. He had flown over 500 combat missions. He had the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, one of Germany's highest awards. He was seen as nearly unbeatable. At 30,000 feet over Germany, his formation met Thunderbolts from the 56th Fighter Group. The Americans had the high ground. Philipp's engine started losing power in the thin air. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, built for fights below 25,000 feet, struggled at this height. The Thunderbolts dove. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, flying the same plane that had survived the June attack, led his flight into position. His combat report was short. Saw hits along the body, plane exploded, no parachute. Hans Philipp, the ace who had survived 500 missions, was dead in seconds. The psychological effect spread through Luftwaffe units. If Philipp couldn't survive against these American fighters, what chance did average pilots have? The flying barrel, once laughed at, had killed one of Germany's best. By autumn 1943, American tactics were fully developed. Thunderbolt pilots no longer turned to fight. They used altitude and speed as weapons. German pilots were forced to defend themselves, unable to reach Americans at 30,000 feet. They could not escape when Thunderbolts dove from above. The P-47 still had weaknesses. Its range was short. The big radial engine used fuel very fast. Early models could escort bombers only to the German border and had to turn back. But engineers fixed this step by step. 75-gallon drop tanks extended range to 230 miles in August 1943. 108-gallon tanks pushed it to 275 miles in September. By April 1944, wing pylons for extra fuel allowed a 425-mile combat range, still not enough to reach Berlin. That mission would go to the longer-range North American P-51 Mustang. But for targets within range, the Thunderbolt was excellent. As 1944 began, American planners saw a new mission that would use the Thunderbolt's greatest strengths. January 1944, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force began planning Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. Air superiority over the invasion beaches was an absolute requirement. But beyond air superiority, planners needed something more. They needed the systematic destruction of German transportation infrastructure. Every railroad, every bridge, every supply depot, every troop concentration required ground attack missions that would expose aircraft to murderous anti-aircraft fire. The P-47 Thunderbolt was built for this mission. Its radial engine, with 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, could sustain damage that would destroy an inline engine. Lose 2 or 3 cylinders and the engine kept running. Its thick aluminum skin could absorb 20 mm and 37 mm anti-aircraft shells and remain airborne. Its straight wing design provided stability for dive bombing and strafing, and its 850 caliber machine guns could shred anything on the ground. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan of Cheddar, Leah-Ebertile 60, the 303rd Fighter Group, pioneered low-level attack tactics in March. 1944 Duncan, a rangy Texan with an aggressive temperament, convinced commanders to authorize operational evaluation of the Thunderbolt as a fast, low-level strafer. He led demonstration missions that showed the aircraft's capability against ground targets. The results exceeded expectations. Thunderbolts could dive from altitude attack at speeds approaching 400 mph to absorb defensive fire and climb back to safety. Pilots learned to identify targets from high-altitude plan attack runs that minimized exposure to flak and coordinate timing so that multiple aircraft hit targets simultaneously. By April 1944, all 9th Air Force P-47 groups had transitioned to the fighter-bomber role. They practiced dive bombing with 500 lb bombs. They mastered the M8 4.5-inch rocket called bazookas by pilots. They perfected strafing techniques with the 8-gun armament. They became ground attack specialists while maintaining air combat capability. As D-Day approached, Thunderbolts spread destruction across northern France. Railroad marshalling yards burned. Bridges collapsed. Supply convoys exploded on roads. Airfields became unusable cratered moonscapes. The attacks deliberately covered the entire area from Brittany to the Pas de Calais, preventing German intelligence from identifying the actual invasion site. German commanders recognized the threat. Anti-aircraft defenses intensified. 88-millimeter flak batteries positioned around critical infrastructure. Lighter 20-millimeter and 37-millimeter guns protected the rest. Convoys and troop positions. Even small arms fire was dangerous for planes attacking at low altitude. Thunderbolt losses went up, but the ratio stayed good. For every 100 missions, less than one plane was lost. The strong construction that had saved Robert Johnson now saved hundreds of other pilots. Planes came back with cylinders missing from the engine, control surfaces shredded, hydraulic systems destroyed, fuel tanks pierced, and they kept flying. Lieutenant Ray Murphy flew a P-47 nicknamed Chief Seattle. On January 22, 1944, his flight attacked the 6th SS Panzer Army as they rode on trains to the Eastern Front. Flak filled the sky. Murphy's plane took hits from 240-millimeter and 120-millimeter shells. The impacts blew out a tire, broke the hydraulic system, and knocked 2 cylinders off the engine. Murphy managed to keep the damaged plane flying for 75 miles back to base. The airstrip was covered in ice. When he touched down on one good tire and one blown tire, 7 tons of Thunderbolt on weak landing gear veered off the runway and went into a snow-covered field. Murphy shut off the engine to prevent fire and climbed out unharmed. Chief Seattle returned to combat after repairs. It was finally lost in a takeoff accident on April 18, 1945, after surviving months of fighting that would have destroyed lesser planes many times over. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Operation Overlord began with the largest amphibious invasion in history. Allied air forces flew over 14,000 missions on D-Day alone. Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force gave close air support to troops landing on the beaches. They attacked German strongpoints. They blocked roads to stop reinforcements from reaching the coast. They flew combat patrol over the invasion fleet. The Luftwaffe showed up briefly, but was overwhelmed and useless. Years of fighting had destroyed German fighter strength. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Replacement pilots arrived with very little training. Fuel shortages limited flying hours. Aircraft production struggled under Allied bombing. And wherever German forces moved, Thunderbolts appeared overhead. The systematic destruction of transportation infrastructure paid off. German armored divisions took days to move distances they could have covered in hours. Supply convoys traveled at night, hiding from planes during the day. Railroad transportation became almost suicidal. Pilots learned the French road network very well. They memorized landmarks, river crossings, and towns. They coordinated with ground forces using radios. Tank commanders could call for air support and describe targets precisely. Thunderbolt pilots would show up within minutes, find the target from the description, and attack. July 29, 1944. Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy near the town of Rosny. German forces trapped between advancing American armored divisions tried to escape. The 405th Fighter Group caught them on the road from 3:10 in the afternoon until 9:40 in the evening. Thunderbolts attacked in relays with bombs, rockets, and strafing runs using the 8-gun armament. When ground forces arrived the next morning, they found massive destruction. Different sources reported different numbers, but the damage was clear. Dozens of tanks destroyed. Hundreds of vehicles and artillery scattered along miles of road. The systematic attacks made retreat impossible. This became the pattern across France. German forces trying to retreat faced destruction from the air. The Falaise Pocket in August 1944 became a killing ground where Thunderbolts and other Allied aircraft destroyed German units trapped by encircling ground forces. Oberst Joseph Priller, a Luftwaffe ace who had first doubted the Thunderbolts' effectiveness in early 1943, watched his forces destroyed from the air. After the war, he admitted he was wrong. "We laughed at them in 1943. Nobody laughs now," he said. He noted that Thunderbolt guns never jammed, never overheated, and the plane exceeded every expectation. He called it the perfect fighter-bomber. Statistics collected after the war showed the scale of destruction. From D-Day on June 6, 1944, until Victory in Europe Day on May 8, 1945, a period of 11 months, P-47 Thunderbolts destroyed or damaged 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. These numbers included all areas where Thunderbolts flew in Europe. The 86,000 figure was conservative, based on gun camera footage and pilot reports that could be checked. The real destruction was probably even higher. Many targets burned after planes attacked. Departed. Artillery and ground forces destroyed vehicles first damaged by air attacks. The chaos of combat made it impossible to count everything exactly, but even the low estimates told the story. In 11 months, Thunderbolt pilots had slowly destroyed the German military's ability to move troops and supplies. Every destroyed locomotive meant trains could not run. Every destroyed railroad car meant supplies could not reach the front. Every destroyed truck meant units could not move. Every destroyed tank meant armor that could not fight. German commanders tried to adjust. They moved at night. They spread out forces to make fewer targets. They camouflaged vehicles and dug in when planes came, but there were limits. Modern mechanized warfare needed movement. Supplies had to reach troops. Reinforcements had to reach the front. Armored divisions had to move. And every move invited attack. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Germany started Operation Watch on the Rhine, a surprise attack through Belgium to split Allied forces. American intelligence had missed the buildup. Bad weather stopped aerial reconnaissance. Whole German armored divisions gathered in the forest under clouds and fog. The attack surprised everyone. German forces broke through American positions, making a bulge in the Allied lines. The Battle of the Bulge became the largest land battle the United States Army fought, involving 600,000 American troops. Weather stayed terrible. Low clouds, snow, fog. Planes could not fly. For days, German forces moved while Allied air power waited on the ground. But when the weather cleared on December 23rd, the Luftwaffe learned what total air power meant. Thunderbolt flights patrolled the front lines non-stop. They found German columns moving supplies and reinforcements. They attacked convoys. They blocked roads. They hit every chance they got. Lieutenant First Class Leslie Bowes flew his P-47, nicknamed Blonde Trouble, on a strafing mission near Noat, Germany, on December 17th. His flight leader bombed a Wehrmacht convoy. As the planes pulled up from their attacks, a huge explosion went off below. A Thunderbolt flying through the debris cloud was hit by shrapnel. The plane started smoking heavily. Bowes shouted over the radio. The damaged P-47 kept flying. The pilot fought to keep control. The aircraft made it back across Allied lines before landing on its belly in a snow-covered field. The pilot walked away with only minor injuries, another proof of Thunderbolt toughness. The Luftwaffe tried one last attack. On January 1st, 1945, nearly 1,000 German fighters and bombers launched Operation Bodenplatte, a surprise strike against Allied airfields. They got the element of surprise and destroyed over 200 Allied planes on the ground, including many P-47s, but the losses could be replaced. American industry built planes faster than combat could destroy them. German losses in Bodenplatte, over 200 planes and almost 300 pilots, were irreplaceable. The operation broke the Luftwaffe's back. By late January 1945, German resistance in the Ardennes collapsed. Allied forces eliminated the bulge and moved forward toward Germany. Thunderbolts went back to destroying German infrastructure. Every bridge, every railroad yard, every supply depot. The grinding campaign went on. First Lieutenant Robert Brail flew low-level support missions from K-29 airfield in Belgium during January 1945. He described how closely they worked with ground forces. Tank commanders sent coordinates by radio. Fighter pilots overhead found targets from those descriptions. You could have a soldier in a Sherman tank talking to you on the radio. When you got overhead, he might say, "We need you to bomb the German tank hiding behind the little farmhouse with the red roof." The problem was that dozens of farmhouses with red roofs could be seen from the sky. To fix this, fighter pilots rotated to the front lines. They joined ground units and directed airstrikes in person. They could speak pilot language while seeing the battlefield from the ground. This made Thunderbolt attacks extremely effective. The final months of the war became a rout. German forces retreated across the Rhine. Allied armies advanced 50 miles some days. Thunderbolts searched all over Germany for targets. They found horse-drawn artillery, showing complete German supply collapse. They found planes hidden in forests and destroyed them on the ground before they could fly. They found trains loaded with supplies and destroyed them before the troops could use them. Pilots faced more danger from small arms fire, but the Thunderbolt kept performing. Desperate German soldiers shot at anything that flew, but the Thunderbolt's toughness kept saving lives. Lieutenant Cliffs Sari took a 20 million or 37 Mahad shell in his engine cowling while strafing trucks near Stralsund on November 20th, 1944. The engine kept running even with damaged cylinders. Oil sprayed across the windscreen, making it impossible to see forward. His wingman guided him back to base 125 miles away. The plane landed safely. April 1945, Allied forces moved deep into Germany. The end was near, but Thunderbolt pilots still flew missions every day. Lieutenant First Class Raymond Knight of the 346th Fighter Squadron, 350th Fighter Group, volunteered many times to lead attacks on enemy airfields. On April 24th and 25, he flew his P-47D, nicknamed O Johnny, into heavy ground fire on low-altitude reconnaissance and strafing missions. Knight's bravery destroyed many German planes on the ground, but on April 25th, ground fire hit his plane during a strafing run. The Thunderbolt crashed. Knight died on impact. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions, one of only 2 P-47 pilots to receive the nation's highest award. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe ended. Final statistics showed the Thunderbolt's impact. Over 746,000 sorties of all types. An aerial kill ratio of 4.6 to 1. Over 7,000 enemy planes destroyed, more than half in air-to-air combat, with the rest in ground attacks. A loss rate of only 0.7% per mission, remarkably low given the intensity of operations. 15,683 P-47s were built between 1941 and 1945. 3,499 were lost in combat for all reasons. More P-47s were made than any other American fighter in history. The huge production numbers showed America's industrial strength. But numbers alone don't show the full importance of the Thunderbolt. The plane represented a big change in fighter design. Earlier fighters focused on agility, speed, and being light. The Thunderbolt focused on firepower, toughness, and survivability. It accepted extra weight for protection. It gave up some maneuverability for deadly guns. It put bringing pilots home safely above, getting the highest performance. This philosophy reflected American strategic thinking. The United States could build thousands of fighters. It could train thousands of pilots. But every pilot saved, every plane that returned despite damage, made combat more effective. A pilot who survived his first tour could fly a second tour. A plane that landed after battle damage could be repaired and returned to fight. German fighters, fast and elegant, were often fragile. A single hit to the cooling system of a Bf-109's inline engine meant a forced landing. Damage to control systems meant the plane was lost. German pilots often had no choice but to bail out from damaged planes. American pilots in Thunderbolts could often bring badly damaged planes home. The psychological effect on German pilots was huge. Knowing that enemy planes could take massive damage while their own planes could not cause constant stress. Every fight had higher risk. Every damaged German plane meant a dead or captured pilot, not just a broken plane. Luftwaffe ace Hannes Bering, who survived the war with 220 confirmed victories, explained German respect for the Thunderbolt. He said the P-47 could take an incredible amount of lead and had to be treated very carefully. Coming from a pilot who had fought for 6 years, flown against every Allied fighter, and was one of the Luftwaffe's most skilled survivors, this opinion mattered. German attitudes had completely changed, from mocking the plane in April 1943 to respecting it by 1945, from calling it the flying barrel to recognizing it as the perfect fighter-bomber. The plane that looked like a barrel proved that combat power came not from sleek design, but from deadly capability. After the war, Thunderbolts kept serving. The plane stayed in frontline use with the United States Air Force until 1949. Foreign Air Forces used P-47s into the 1950s. The Brazilian Air Force received a Presidential Unit Citation in the 1980s for their Thunderbolt missions in Italy. Their first fighter squadron flew 445 missions from November 1944 to May 1945, showing the Thunderbolt's power went beyond American pilots. The 56th Fighter Group, which flew Thunderbolts throughout the war, claimed 677.5 aerial victories and 311 ground kills at the cost of 128 planes. They were the only 8th Air Force unit that refused to switch to P-51 Mustangs, preferring to keep their Thunderbolts. Their loyalty to the plane showed pilot confidence in the design. Colonel Francis Gabreski, who became the top American ace in the European theater with 28 confirmed victories, all in P-47s, later spoke about the aircraft. He praised its roomy cockpit, its reliability, and its ability to bring pilots home safely. He admitted it wasn't the fastest or most agile fighter, but in his view, it was the best fighter-bomber of the war. The few Thunderbolts that survived became treasured warbirds. Museums around the world display P-47s. A handful are still able to fly, performing at air shows and commemorative events. When a restored Thunderbolt takes off, the sound of the R-2800 radial engine at full power is unmistakable. A deep, thundering roar that matches the aircraft's name. Modern air forces studied the Thunderbolt's design philosophy. The idea of a heavily armed, heavily armored attack plane that focused on survivability influenced later designs. The Fairchild Republic A-10, Thunderbolt Tsanusats, Sadatin, Tidantuno, designed in the 1970s for close air support, directly honored the P-47's legacy in its name. The A-10, nicknamed Warthog, follows the same principles. Heavy guns, armor protection, survivability over speed, ability to take damage and keep flying. The historical record is clear. The Republic P-47, Thunderbolt, was not the prettiest fighter of World War II. It was not the fastest or most agile. It did not have the longest range until late models appeared. But measured by combat, effectiveness, pilot survival, sheer destructive power, and the way enemy respect changed from mockery to fear. the Thunderbolt ranks among the greatest fighters ever built. 86,000 targets destroyed in roughly 11 months. From D-Day to victory in Europe Day. Railroad cars, locomotives, armored vehicles, and trucks. The systematic destruction of German military logistics. The grinding destruction of the enemy's ability to fight. Move, to supply, to fight. This was the Thunderbolt's legacy. Captain Varro, who had radioed that the Americans were flying barrels on April 15, 1943, survived the war. He never flew combat again after 1944, wounded in action. In post-war interviews, he admitted his first opinion was wrong. The flying barrels had shown themselves to be some of the most effective combat planes of the war. Their ugly, awkward look hid deadly power. The change in the nickname tells the story. Flying Barrel started as mockery, a joke from experienced pilots who judged planes by looks. But as German forces retreated across Europe under constant air attack, as supply lines burned, as every movement risked destruction from above, the nickname changed. The Flying Barrel became something to fear. 68,000 trucks destroyed. Every truck meant supplies that never got to the front. Food, ammo, fuel, medical supplies, replacement parts. The result was the German military ran out of what it needed. Units couldn't move, fight, or defend because supplies didn't arrive. 9,000 locomotives destroyed. In a time when railroads carried most military logistics, every destroyed locomotive meant trains that couldn't run, supplies stuck at yards, reinforcements delayed, wounded soldiers left behind. The railroad system was the lifeline of German military power. Thunderbolts destroyed it methodically. 6,000 armored fighting vehicles destroyed. Tanks, self-propelled guns, armored personnel carriers. Every destroyed vehicle meant less combat power. German armored units, once the spearhead of Blitzkrieg, were worn down by constant air attacks. Divisions that started campaigns at full strength reached the front with only a fraction of their vehicles. The losses never stopped. 86,000 railroad cars destroyed, a huge number showing the complete destruction of German supply capacity. Each car could carry tons of supplies. Multiply by 86,000, and it means millions of tons of food, ammo, fuel, and equipment never reached German forces, all destroyed before use. These numbers, taken from gun camera footage and verified pilot reports, are conservative. Actual destruction was likely higher. Many targets burned even after planes left. Secondary explosions destroyed vehicles near the main targets. Damaged vehicles were later finished off by artillery or ground forces. Precise counting was impossible in the chaos of combat. But even conservative numbers told a clear story. American industry, turned into combat planes, pilot training, and tactics, had destroyed enemy military infrastructure in a planned way. The Flying Barrel, mocked and laughed at in 1943, had become the tool that destroyed German military supply lines by 1945. The lesson went beyond World War II. Modern military planners studied the Thunderbolt campaign. They saw that air superiority combined with planned attacks on supplies could defeat even large, well-equipped ground forces. The idea of deep battle, attacking enemy supply lines and reserves before they reached the front, was proven by Thunderbolt operations in Europe. The P-47 showed that plane design always involved trade-offs. Maximum performance in one area meant accepting limits in others. The Thunderbolt designers chose firepower and survivability over agility and range. This choice worked perfectly for the missions the plane actually flew. Ground attack needed durability more than turning ability. Staying alive mattered more than maximum speed. Fighter pilots learned that tactics mattered as much as the plane itself. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zicky's boom and zoom strategy let Thunderbolt pilots use their plane's strengths while avoiding its weaknesses. High-altitude energy fighting canceled German turning advantages. Diving attacks used weight and power as weapons. This tactic made the Thunderbolt, once a mediocre turning fighter, into a deadly energy fighter. The 56th Fighter Group's loyalty to the Thunderbolt refusing to switch to Mustangs when all other 8th Air Force units did, showed pilot confidence. These men had flown combat missions every day for 2 years. They knew the Thunderbolt's strengths and weaknesses very well. Their choice to keep flying it said a lot about the plane's quality. Modern pilots who fly restored Thunderbolts say the plane feels solid, stable, and powerful. The controls are heavy but steady. Visibility is good once in the air. The sound and vibration of the big radial engine give constant feedback. The aircraft makes pilots confident just by being strong and solid. One pilot described it as flying a tank, meant as a compliment, not a criticism. The historical importance of the Thunderbolt goes beyond combat numbers. The plane showed American industrial thinking applied to war. Build it heavy, build it strong, build it reliable, accept weight for capability. Focus on making many good planes instead of chasing maximum performance and losing everything else. This plan worked. 15,783 aircraft were built, a production run that showed America's manufacturing power. Each plane needed thousands of parts made by subcontractors across the United States. They were put together at Republic Aviation factories in Farmingdale, New York, and Evansville, Indiana. The supply chain, quality checks, and workforce training needed to produce over 15,000 complicated planes during wartime was a huge achievement, equal to the technical design itself. Every P-47 that rolled off the line showed American economic power turned into military strength. Aluminum came from bauxite mines. Steel was forged in Pittsburgh. Rubber from synthetic plants. Electronics from radio makers. Instruments from precision shops. Engines from Pratt & Whitney factories. Everything coordinated, synchronized, and delivered to Republic Aviation for assembly. German plane makers made excellent designs, but couldn't match American production numbers. The Focke-Wulf FW-1 one of Germany's best piston engine fighters, had 20,000 built during the entire war. More than the Thunderbolt, but over a longer time. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, Germany's most produced fighter, reached over 33,000 planes. Impressive, but split between many variants and built over 6 years. American fighter production totaled over 99,000 planes between 1940 and 1945. P-40 Warhawks, P-38 Lightnings, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, P-63 King Cobras, P-80 Shooting Stars. The huge volume overwhelmed Axis production. For every German fighter destroyed, American factories made 2, 3, or 5 replacements. This production edge, combined with better pilot training and new tactics, created an unstoppable force. German pilots faced more enemies, more skilled, flying better planes. The losses heavily favored the Allies. Experienced German pilots died. Replacements arrived with very little training. Plane quality went down as material shortages forced substitutions and simplifications. The Luftwaffe went into a death spiral it never recovered from. The Thunderbolt played a big part in this. Its low loss rate meant pilots lived to fly many missions. Its heavy guns made it deadly in both air and ground fights. Its strong design meant planes came back even when damaged, ready for repair and reuse. All this together increased combat power over time. In the end, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt stands as one of history's most effective combat planes. Not because it was the best at any single performance measure, but because it did its missions extremely well. Because it brought pilots home alive. Because it destroyed enemy forces in a planned, steady way. Because it changed from a mocked flying barrel into a feared weapon. 86,000 targets in 11 months, a number almost too big to understand. Think differently. 7,800 targets destroyed per month. 258 targets every day. Every single day for 11 months. 10 targets per hour all day and night. A constant grinding destruction of enemy power. The Germans called it a flying barrel to mock it. But history remembers it as one of the planes that helped win World War II. The barrel that helped destroy the Third Reich.